probably agree on.
Yeah, the playoff team for sure.
So do you.
I mean, I tell you what, I don't think there was a more accurate state. And
if they struggle again, I mean, I don't think there's any way you can keep Alex Critch, but.
What's up, y'all? I'm Bud Elliott. This is Cover 3 Summer School, and I want to talk Tennessee. No better place to go than Go Vols 247. Bring on my man, Patrick Brown. Patrick, welcome back to Summer School.
Thanks, Bud. Appreciate you having me back on, and I got to thank you for doing this series. It was very helpful to me last summer when I was doing some very early opponent preview stuff. So getting the inside track on some of Tennessee's opponents helped, and hopefully I can be as informative as some of those guys were.
Absolutely. We have so many great experts in our network here at 24/7 Sports and CBS, and I'm gonna lean on it. Like it's hard, especially with the transfer portal now to understand all 130 teams. So we'll try to knock out 60 or 70 of these and give people something to listen to maybe when they're at the beach or at the cabin this summer. So I'll start. Where, if anywhere, is this team just noticeably better than it was last year? And last year was a pretty good year. I mean, they won 9 ball games. I thought kind of maintained the gains in some ways that they had made under Josh Heupel after a really good 2022 season.
Yeah, I think the defensive line is a strength of this team, or going to be a strength of this team. But I think to answer your question from last season, from 23 to 24, I think the biggest jump probably for Tennessee can be expected at wide receiver. You look at last season, they lost Jalen Hyatt, who won the Blitnikoff, was an All-American, and they lost Cedric Tillman too, who Tennessee had the best offense in college football in 22, and he was healthy for about 2.5 games, which is pretty remarkable when you think about it. But those guys were third-round picks. They obviously lost Hendon Hooker as well at quarterback. But I think at receiver, too, I think that was a drop-off that maybe Tennessee wasn't expecting last season. They lost Brew McCoy in the 5th game of the year against South Carolina. They really never were able to replace him. He's sort of a unique guy to have in your receiving core with how big he is and physical and how he plays. And Dante Thornton was a guy that they brought in from Oregon that they were really high on, but he just had a lot of offseason injuries that sort of never let him get going. They tried to put him in at the slot position and it didn't quite work out. They slid him to outside for about 3 starts, and he started to show something a little bit. Made a great touchdown catch against Missouri early in that game, but actually got hurt on that play. And so by the end of the season, they were down basically to 4 scholarship receivers that they were playing. They had a couple more guys that were freshmen that were redshirting, but a couple of those guys were redshirt freshmen and a sophomore and Squirrel White. So that's a position that I think Tennessee was very intentional this offseason about addressing, improving both the quality and the quantity in that room. And I think they've done that. Their transfer this year is Chris Brazel from Tulane, had a great redshirt freshman season, 711 yards, I think 5 touchdowns, playing with a couple of guys that I think one guy down there got drafted, another guy from the Green Wave got were on a roster as an undrafted free agent. So he was not the main guy down there, but made a lot of plays for them, catching passes for Michael Pratt. And then, of course, you look at this recruiting class, 2 of the headliners for what Tennessee brought in this past cycle were 2 receivers and Mike Matthews, a 5-star who obviously that wide receiver class was loaded. Tells you that it was loaded, that he was like, I think the 9th ranked guy per 24/7 Sports. Braylon Staley's sort of maybe a little bit under the radar there just because of Matthews, but Matthews and Brazel were really good in the spring. I mentioned Thornton earlier. He's was a guy that maybe could have looked elsewhere, but he seems to have a fresh outlook on life and has been healthier and more confident this offseason. They're going to get McCoy back. His progress has been encouraging, and his working his way back from that broken ankle. So, and then they've got some guys that played a lot last season that also kind of showed in the spring that, hey, don't forget about me. So Tennessee has never really rotated at receiver under this staff, under Josh Heupel in this group, but I think they finally have the bodies to do so. They should be able to play 4, 5, 6 guys instead of just relying on 3, maybe 3.5. And they should be able to absorb if they get a couple injuries like they had last season. I think that lack of depth and quality depth got exposed, and that was something that Tennessee really tried to address in the offseason. And every indication this spring and from what we've heard behind the scenes, it appears that they've done it. And Heupel said after the spring game, this is the deepest receiver group he's had. So that should be an area that should be much better for Tennessee in 24.
I live here in Orlando, so I got to see Matthews at the Under Armour game, all the practices. In my notebook, it's not going to grab now. It's down in the truck. I just circled slot choice. Like, man, like this, the quarterbacks aren't always hitting him. He's not always catching them, but like in that Tennessee offense, Matthews' ability to just get open in space, I don't know if they're going to play him in the slot. I would enjoy seeing them play him in the slot. Like this, that's a fun fit, I think, for that Tennessee offense. But yeah, it was a pretty insane receiver class. And Jeremiah Smith, who's going to Ohio State looks like some, third-year college player counselor at some of these things where he's just kind of toying with five-star corners. New guy throwing to these receivers who I also saw 2 weekends ago down here. Well, by the time this thing airs, late May, he was with the low pro 7-on team that he played on in high school. That's Nico. He's kind of jacked now. Like, they put on some good weight on him, dude. I had not seen him in person up close since Elite 11 2 years ago. First of all, how do we say the last name for the audience at home, as a guy has to come every day? And second, what do you expect out of Nico this year?
I was wondering how long it would take before we got to Nico. That was almost my answer for the last one, but it's Iamaleava, and I'm butchering that because I don't have the tone that Polynesians have when they say their names. So everybody can just call him Nico. That's just easier. That's what he's known by. But to your point, but yeah, he's everybody, Tennessee fans have always been like, well, he's really skinny, and I'm like, yeah, he's kind of a big dude. I mean, he's a legit 6'5", 6'6", and he said in the spring that he was up to, I believe it was 215 pounds. So I think he got here at 190 last January. So he's up 25 pounds. And as you said, he's filled out some, and maybe doesn't look like a freshman anymore. I don't think he's hardly ever looked like a freshman since he got to campus. That's what everybody said, even last season. When he got it to Knoxville for Orange Bowl practices, even before he enrolled, they said throw him on the scout team. They said, hey, go run the scout team. And he went and did it and didn't bat an eye, which is sort of maybe not something you might expect from a five-star, a guy that was had been a celebrity in Knoxville for months after he committed. But real humble, real good work ethic. I think you saw him sort of bide his time behind Joe Milton last season. And certainly when he got his opportunity in the Citrus Bowl, he looked pretty good. I don't think he was perfect. He wouldn't say that he was perfect, but you saw some of the potential, even in some of the mop-up duty he had. You saw his ability to move around the pocket, extend plays, throw on the run, scramble if he needed to. And really in the bowl game, just the poise he played with. He didn't look like a freshman making his first start. And I know Iowa's, it's easy to crap on the offense, but that defense was pretty solid. I mean, they did a decent job. They had to do every week to be competitive and win 10 games. But Tennessee's offense wasn't firing on all cylinders, but certainly they moved the football, and Nico was able to make some plays with his feet, with his arm too, and the cast he had around him in that game, from the offensive line to tight end to receiver, it's not going to look like what it's going to look like in the fall. So there's a lot of excitement about him. I think the staff has been pretty pleased with how he's sort of come along this offseason. He's obviously got a lot of ability, a lot of talent, a lot of natural ability, but I think he also has those sort of intangibles that you need at quarterback, that it factor. I think he's a guy that can be like Hendon Hooker in the fact that he can put you on his back and bail you out of a bad play and turn nothing into something. And those are the kind of plays that really demoralize the defense. And he's a guy that can do that. And there's obviously a lot of excitement around here for what he's going to look like and what he's going to do this fall and beyond.
Do you think the Tennessee record would have been significantly different if they had just rolled with Nico from day one?
It's tough to say. I don't think so. It's really tough to put him in a situation like in Gainesville. We just don't know at this point what he would have done. I think Milton. I've said this before, but I think Milton's biggest fault was that he was the guy after the guy. I mean, when you look at way Hendon Hooker was playing in 22, I mean, he was playing at a Heisman Trophy finalist, if not winning level for most of that season. And then you go to Milton and he was sort of middle of the pack SEC. I mean, that's a big drop off. And I think there were seasons in the past where Tennessee had some pretty bad quarterback play where they would have taken what Milton did last season. That would have been good production for them. But, he was just so inconsistent a lot of the time. And the offense had some really big flaws that it couldn't overcome. They were, had a huge drop off in the red zone. Their explosiveness in the passing game dipped pretty significantly. Part of that was quarterback error. Part of that was receivers not making plays. They got a lot of different. I think they were played different. I think defenses went back last offseason and said, we're just not going to give up home runs. They play a lot of 2 deep, a lot of zone, a lot of drop 8 coverage. I think Missouri spent an entire month in the summer devising a defense that they didn't play in any other game, but they played in the Tennessee game and it worked pretty well the way they sort of designed that. And certainly after giving up 60 in 2 straight years, I think that maybe that was the motivation there. But it's tough to know. In Tennessee's 4 losses, the defense also didn't play very well. And there were missed opportunities, like I said, from the receivers. I think, it's easy for a lot of people to pin stuff on Milton, but there were other parts of the offense that weren't up to what they were in 2022. The offensive line too was, they had dealt with a lot of injuries after, that 2022 lineup had Darnell Wright, first of all. But also four of those 5 starters rarely missed a meaningful snap. So they didn't have that kind of continuity on the offensive line last season. They didn't have Cooper Mays in that Florida game where the offense went in a tank. And so it's tough to say. I mean, I think there were other issues in some of those games that might have, resulted in the same outcome independent of the quarterback. But that's something that I've pondered and have been asked by Tennessee fans. But I guess the bottom line is we'll just never know.
I mean, certainly your right tackle suddenly missing in Gainesville, like that's regardless of how good or bad Florida is. That's never an easy place to play at night, especially not in a rivalry ball game. So switching to the other side of the ball here, Tennessee's secondary to me looks completely rebuilt, but I'm kind of heartened that they had that D line that you mentioned at the jump that may allow them to not have to blitz a whole lot and probably can play a lot of drop coverage if they need to, because they could probably just get home in waves.
That was one of the other things we noticed in the spring is that Tennessee's defensive line has a chance to be pretty good. And obviously Tennessee had a handful of offensive linemen that were out for various reasons in the spring, but this defensive line has played pretty well for most of Josh Heupel's tenure. You look at the tackle for loss numbers, they've been at the top of the SEC every year. The sacks really took a jump last season with James Pierce Jr. He's sort of the headliner of that group. He's a guy that showed last season that he was capable of taking over a game. He took over the Citrus Bowl with a couple of huge plays in the second half, including a pick six where he looked like a defensive back. Shoot, maybe they should start him at corner. I don't know. But, South Carolina couldn't block him. Texas A&M couldn't block him. I think the next step for him, and he's obviously gotten some number 1 overall pick and 25 kind of buzz this offseason. But I think for him, he's got to be able to counter being sort of the top guy on the scouting report for other opposing offenses. They're going to focus a lot of attention on him, and he's got to make big plays in those big games. He's got to win those matchups against some of the best offensive tackles he's going to face. So, but that he's just one piece, and they can roll probably in 2-3 deep without much of a drop off, particularly at defensive tackle when. One of their third teamers this spring was David Hobbs, who was a top 50 guy that Tennessee beat out Georgia and Alabama and the North Carolina schools to get out of North Carolina. So that's what that's the strength of their team. They should be able to stop the run. And the question is, can they get home on third down and can they get off the field on third down? That was a big problem in all their losses. Going back to your question about, would Nico have changed any of the outcomes? Tennessee's third down defense and their 4 losses was miserable. And so it's really hard to, for an offense to get in a rhythm when they're not on the field, and it's hard for a defense to, make the stops they need to if they're not getting off the field. And that was a problem for Tennessee in those 4 losses. But you look at, they've got some pretty good guys up front with Amari Thomas, Omar Norman-Lott, Bryson Eason up the middle. That other defensive end position is where they lost Tyler Barron, who I believe is headed to Miami now. Hopefully he doesn't transfer again in the time between when we recorded this and when
this is May 22nd. So
he just committed to Miami.
Yeah.
Right. So we'll see if he ends up playing for the Hurricanes. You can never tell with Tyler, but again, they've got guys that, Josh Joseph is a former guy that was a blue chip recruit. Caleb Herring is a guy that's a sophomore that they're expecting to step up and take more of a role. Jordan Ross is a 5-star freshman coming in. Maybe he can be sort of a situational pass rush guy. So they're really deep with that group. Rodney Garner obviously is one of the best defensive line coaches in the country. So that should be a strength, and they're going to need that defense to be a strength. Or they're going to need that defensive line to be a strength because, they had some moments last season, second half at Alabama, first half of Florida, where they weren't the better team in the trenches and they weren't the better line in the trenches. And if Tennessee's defensive line isn't playing well, it's really hard for the other parts of the defense to overcome it. So that group is going to have a lot riding on it this fall. But, it was pretty eye-opening when defensive coordinator Tim Banks, like the second or third day of spring, came out and said, we have a chance to have the best defensive line in the country. It's a big talk for middle of March. So that's a high bar for them to attain, but they certainly got the depth and the flexibility and the personnel to try to get that done.
So Tennessee lost its leading tackler, and from reading y'all's coverage and reading kind of the vibes on the checkerboard, which is, if you're not a Tennessee member at Go Vols 247, I think that's a really, really good message board. It's really active, a lot of personality on there, very opinionated people, which is kind of what makes a good message board. The vibes are kind of like, leading tackler got like, why is Tennessee not that concerned about losing its leading tackler?
Yeah, you're talking about Elijah Herring, who the plan for Tennessee, basically, they had Aaron Beasley coming off a really good season in 22. And they brought in Keenan Peely from BYU, veteran guy. He was supposed to be sort of a 1-year bridge to guys like Elijah Herring, and they recruited pretty well at that linebacker position. Brian Jean-Marie went to Michigan this offseason. He did a good job stocking that room, particularly in these last 2 classes. But Peely gets hurt in the first game, and Herring, as a sophomore, they kind of plan to play him in a backup or rotational role, sort of build him up to where, in an ideal world, Peely starts for you all last season, and then Herring takes over as your starting middle linebacker this season. That didn't happen. Peely gets hurt first game, misses the rest of the season. He comes back. Herring missed the spring after undergoing a shoulder procedure, and Peely got back out on the field, and he's going to be the starter. And Herring, he said, "Hey, I want to go somewhere to start." Ends up at Memphis, where he should have a pretty good chance to start. But again, with Peely coming back, the staff has been really high on him. He's sort of a mystery because we just really haven't seen him play at this level. I think he played 30 snaps in that Virginia game before he got hurt with the triceps injury that sidelined him the rest of the way. But Jeremiah Thielander is a sophomore that should play a lot for this defense. William Inge, who came over from Washington, looked like he was headed to Alabama at one point, but then Tennessee sort of scooped him up. He's a guy that I think has clicked with Inge. Arion Carter's a guy that's a breakout candidate as a sophomore at linebacker. He kind of looked like a guy that was still finding his way, and then he got hurt in the Kentucky game last season and underwent shoulder surgery. So, but he was a guy that Tennessee went all out to beat Alabama to get. But he was a running back for most of his high school career, so still a little new to linebacker, but he's a guy that has a chance to be a big-time player. So you couple those 3 guys in. Edwin Spillman's a freshman they're really excited about. May not play a lot on defense this season, but should be wrecking stuff on special teams. That's probably why Tennessee fans are okay with losing Herring, who you saw some of his inexperience last season as a first-time starter. Should be able to see him play faster. I would expect him. They were expecting him to be a lot better this season, but now he's going to go see if he can be better with another team.
So Vanderbilt as one of the conference road games to me is always, and I think they'll be better this year, but that's always to me a pretty big advantage when you get that as one of your roadies. And Tennessee, if you look at the odds to win the league, they play 4 of the 5 worst teams in the SEC. The only sort of bottom dweller that they miss, so to speak, is South Carolina. And they also don't play Texas and Ole Miss, which, if pass defense is potentially a question mark for this team, I like missing those teams if I'm the Vols, as opposed to I get to play Florida, Kentucky, teams we don't know if they can chuck it around. What is the path to this team making the playoff? Can they get in at 9-3? Do they need to win 10 games? If so, what unit really needs to step up to get them to the playoff?
Yeah, I think 10-2 is maybe, if you're in the SEC, and maybe the Big Ten too. If you're, from the past couple of years, 10-2 SEC teams would have been in or safely in. If you look at Tennessee 2 years ago, you look at Missouri last season, look at Ole Miss, who I think got in the New Year's 6-2. So if there's 4 10-2 teams in the league, maybe it's a beauty contest at that point. But I think if you're Tennessee, you're probably thinking 10-2 is the mark that can get you one of those spots. Maybe not in 12, but if the playoff goes to 14, and I'm sure it'll end up at 16 at one point. But I think 10-2 is maybe the target if you're Tennessee, in terms of getting in one of those expanded playoff spots, and hoping it'd be pretty awesome to cover a playoff game in the middle of December at Neyland Stadium. That would be quite a scene if it happened. But I think the last 2 seasons show that if you're going to be, I think the last 2 seasons for Tennessee showed the difference between a 10-11 win type team that can get one of those spots, and a team that's an 8-9 win team that's good, that can beat a lot of the teams you're supposed to beat, but maybe isn't good enough to kind of get into the mix for the playoff. So I think star power is probably the biggest point that Tennessee lost from that 2022 team. Had Jalen Wright last season, and Pierce was a guy that emerged, but that was something that they certainly missed, I think, last season. But to your point, you touched on the pass defense. I can't not mention the secondary for Tennessee. That's been such a kind of a liability. It's been maybe the biggest weakness. It certainly was the big weakness for the team in 2022, and they had an awful game at South Carolina that knocked them out of the playoff that season. So they've sort of flipped the page personnel-wise, flipped the roster entirely. They lost 5 of their top 6 corners. Their other 3 starters at safety and the star positions are all gone. A couple of those guys transferred that are veteran guys. So they're turning it over to a lot of young guys. A couple of juniors and third-year players that have sort of waited their turn are going to be starters. There's a sophomore in Ricky Gibson that has a chance to be pretty good at cornerback. He was a guy that Georgia wanted coming out of high school, coming out of the Birmingham area. They went to the transfer portal to boost that position as well. Got Jermod McCoy from Oregon State. Played, I think he started 5 games as a freshman for the Beavers. And, he gave up some plays, but, you look at some of the PFF stuff and he sort of held his own going against Roma Dunze, against Washington. And obviously he faced a lot of good receivers and quarterbacks in that league out in the Pac-12. RIP. And so they went down to the group of 5 level to get some guys with starting experience to boost the corner and the safety spots. And Boo Carter is a freshman that they're really excited about too, that is probably going to play. So that's the biggest question mark and maybe the biggest unknown. You could put out any possible outcome for that secondary. They could be better. They could be about the same. They could be worse. I don't think anything would surprise me. They're not super deep at cornerback. Beyond the top 3 guys, Jalen McMurray is a guy that played actually high school football with Caleb Williams and Olu Fashanu in DC, went to Temple, was a 2-year starter there. He's probably their 3rd cornerback at this point. So that's the biggest question mark, is how quickly can that group gel? And can that group be a little bit more solid than a lot of the veterans that have sort of moved on? A few of those guys went to the NFL, a few of those guys transferred. Tennessee feels they've upgraded the playmaking and the athleticism there, but it's just young and unproven. So that's the biggest unknown for this team, that you expect the offense to bounce back with Nico and the way they've improved at receiver. The defensive line is going to be pretty good. Between Nico and the defensive line, Tennessee should feel pretty good about its chances of winning most games. But to shore up any potential weaknesses and fix the liabilities that have been problems for them in the past, that have been maybe kept them from getting into the playoffs, that secondary is a group that we'll have to see how quickly they can gel and how good they are, and if those young, unproven guys turn out to be better than the guys that Tennessee is leaning on them to replace.
There have been teams that have rode a really special quarterback, a damn good defensive line, and maybe not a whole lot else around them to pretty good results, including like 2010 Auburn. I'm not saying Nico is Cam Newton, but also I think Tennessee's parts around him are much better than what that Auburn team had, which was basically just kind of Cam and Farley and maybe not a lot else. Patrick, we're going to be looking forward to covering this and watching you guys covered on Go Vols 24/7, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, bud. Appreciate you having me on.